A millionaire CEO thought his money gave him the power to insult anyone. But one single word to a waitress cost him everything. In just a few minutes, he lost a $200 million deal, his reputation, and the respect of the world. This isn't just a story about arrogance. It's a lesson in why respect is more valuable than wealth. Stay with me, because what happened inside that luxury restaurant will shock you. It all began on an ordinary Friday evening at one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city, the kind of place where chandeliers glistened like diamonds, and every table was filled with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and soft background music from a live piano. The atmosphere was vibrant, filled with high-profile guests, wealthy investors, and powerful business leaders who had come not only for the exquisite food, but also to network and close important deals. In the center of it all sat Richard Collins, a millionaire CEO whose name was well known in corporate circles. Richard was the type of man who walked into a room and instantly drew attention, not because of charm or kindness, but because of his flashy lifestyle, expensive suits, and an arrogance that made him both admired and disliked. People whispered about his success, but many also warned of his ruthless attitude and habit of looking down on anyone he thought beneath him. That evening was meant to be one of Richard's crowning moments. He had just come out a long day of meetings with a group of wealthy foreign investors, and this dinner was supposed to be the final, celebratory step towards sealing a massive $200 million deal. The investors were smiling. Conversations flowed easily, and everyone at the table seemed to share in the excitement of a partnership that promised enormous profits. For Richard, it was a chance to show off, not just his business brilliance, but also his power and influence in front of both his investors and the many eyes watching from around the restaurant. But then, in the middle of this elegant setting, a single interaction changed everything. A waitress named Amina, a young black woman known for her politeness and professionalism, approached their table to take the group's order. She spoke gently, her notepad in hand, trying to make sure she captured every detail correctly despite the lively noise of the restaurant. When she asked Richard politely to repeat his drink choice, her tone carried nothing but respect. Yet Richard, already used to being obeyed without question, suddenly snapped. His face hardened, his arrogance boiled over, and in a loud, cutting voice he said, "Are you stupid or something? How hard is it to understand a simple order?" The words echoed through the restaurant, slicing through the laughter and music like a knife. Chairs stopped moving, conversations halted, and every eye turned toward Richard's table. For a few seconds, the room was completely still. Amina froze, the insult burning in her ears. She felt her chest tighten, and for a moment it seemed as though tears might fall. But then, with remarkable strength, she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and regained her composure. She knew she was on duty, and she would not let cruelty rob her of dignity. What no one in that room realized at that moment, however, was that Richard's cruel outburst had not just embarrassed a waitress. It had just destroyed his own future. Instead of letting anger consume her or snapping back with the same disrespect, Amina chose a very different path, one that no one at that table had expected. She stood tall, steadied her breath, and responded with a voice that was both calm and firm. Looking Richard directly in the eye, she said, "Sir, I may not be perfect, but I'm definitely not stupid. My job is to serve you with dignity, and I expect to be treated with the same respect." Her words weren't loud, but the quiet strength behind them carried across the table like a sudden clap of thunder on a clear day. For a few seconds, no one moved. The investors froze in disbelief, staring at Richard as if they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned closer to one another and whispered in low voices, clearly unsettled by what had happened. One investor raised his eyebrows and shook his head ever so slightly, his body language saying more than words ever could. It was as if Amina's calm defense had peeled away the layers of Richard's polished image, exposing the arrogance underneath for everyone to see. Yet, despite being humiliated in front of powerful businessmen and a restaurant full of guests, Amina didn't let her dignity waver. She carried on with her duties as though nothing had happened, delivering the rest of her service with the same professionalism she always showed. She made sure every glass was refilled, every plate was served correctly, and every guest, except Richard, felt acknowledged and cared for. The contrast between her composure and Richard's cruelty couldn't have been clearer. As she gracefully moved around the table, Amina's quiet resilience began to earn her silent admiration. Guests who had been shocked moments before now looked at her with newfound respect. They saw not just a waitress, but a woman who refused to let herself be belittled, who chose strength over anger, and who carried herself with dignity even when insulted. Richard, however, couldn't see what was happening. He leaned back in his chair with a smug smirk plastered on his face, clearly believing he had put Amina in her place. In his mind, his wealth and status gave him the right to treat people however he pleased. But what he didn't realize was that his arrogance had already written the ending to his story. The investors, who had come to evaluate him not just as a businessman, but as a leader, were taking mental notes. And from the looks on their faces, they weren't impressed. For the foreign investors seated at the table, the dinner was never just about enjoying gourmet meals or sipping expensive wine. In their minds, this evening was a final test, a chance to see Richard Collins not only as a businessman, but as a human being. Numbers on paper could look good, contract could appear solid, but true partnerships were built on trust, values, and mutual respect. These investors had worked with powerful leaders all around the world, and they knew one simple truth. A person's real character is revealed not in how they treat their equals, but in how they treat those who have no power over them. And in that single careless moment, Richard had shown them exactly who he was. The arrogant insult he threw at the waitress, a woman simply doing her job, spoke louder than any business proposal ever could. He had revealed a lack of patience, a lack of humility, and most importantly, a lack of respect for others. The investors exchanged subtle glances, each silently acknowledging that they had just seen the red flag they needed to walk away. One of the men, Mr. Hassan, leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses thoughtfully before whispering to the colleague seated beside him. "If he disrespects a simple waitress like this," he murmured, his voice tinged with disapproval, "how will he treat us once the deal is signed? If he cannot control his arrogance here, imagine what he'll be like when power is completely in his hands." His words were quiet, but the weight of them was undeniable. Another investor nodded, leaning closer to add, "Business is about respect and balance. Money matters, yes, but if a partner doesn't respect people, he cannot be trusted. Arrogance is dangerous. If he treats his employees and servers this way, then one day he may treat us the same. We'll regret it if we tie ourselves to a man who thinks his money makes him untouchable." For the rest of the dinner, the investors remained outwardly polite. They smiled at Richard's jokes, they nodded at his business talk, and they ate their meals without creating a scene. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have seemed like everything was still on track. But in truth, the decision had already been sealed in their minds. Richard Collins had failed the true test, the test of character, and no amount of wealth or smooth talking could undo the impression he had made. After dinner ended, Richard Collins was on top of the world, or at least he thought he was. He leaned back in his chair with a smug smile, confident that the deal was practically sealed. He shook hands with the investors, cracked a few more jokes, and strutted around the restaurant as though he were already celebrating his $200 million victory. In his mind, the evening had been a success. He believed his charm, his wealth, and his reputation had impressed everyone in the room. What he didn't realize was that behind the polite smiles of his guests, disappointment and disapproval had been building steadily. A few minutes later, the investors requested to speak with him privately in the lounge. Richard walked in with his chest out and a grin on his face, already imagining the headlines about his next big business triumph. But what happened in that quiet, dimly lit room would shatter his pride in an instant. Mr. Hassan, the lead investor, stood up slowly, his tone firm but calm. "Mr. Collins," he began, "we appreciate your hospitality tonight. But after careful consideration, we've decided not to move forward with this deal." Richard's smile faltered. He blinked in confusion, as if he had misheard. What? Not move forward? Why? We spent months working on this, he stammered. Mr. Hassan's eyes did not waver. We came here not just to review numbers or sign contracts. We came to see the man we would be trusting with a $200 million partnership. And what we saw tonight was not the kind of character we can align with. A true leader respects everyone, from his peers to those who serve him. Tonight, you showed us that you value neither dignity nor respect. Money is important, yes, but character is priceless. And for us, respect is non-negotiable. Richard's face turned pale. He raised his hands defensively, stuttering out excuses. It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean it like that. You don't know how stressful these negotiations have been. He even attempted a forced apology, trying to soften the damage. But the investors had already made up their minds. One by one, they shook their heads, gathered their documents, and walked out of the lounge, leaving Richard standing alone in shock. His team, watching silently from the corner, could barely meet his eyes. In a matter of minutes, his arrogance had cost him not just a partnership, but a staggering $200 million opportunity, a blow that would haunt him for years to come. Word of the shocking incident didn't stay within the four walls of the restaurant for long. In today's world, where every phone is a camera and every bystander is a reporter, it only took a few minutes before whispers turned into posts. Some of the investors' assistants discreetly recorded snippets of Richard's outburst, while a few diners who had overheard the insult posted about it on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. By the time midnight rolled around, screenshots and short clips were circulating everywhere. The headline practically wrote itself. Millionaire CEO insults waitress. Loses $200 million deal on the spot. By morning, the story had exploded across social media. News outlets picked it up, influencers discussed it, and millions of people joined in the conversation. For most viewers, Amina quickly became a symbol of dignity and quiet strength. People admired how she had refused to crumble under humiliation and instead responded with grace and calmness. Comment sections overflowed with messages like, "She handled it better than anyone could have, and this woman is proof that respect matters more than money." Strangers from around the world praised her for standing tall against a man who thought his wealth made him untouchable. Some even started online campaigns to support her, calling her an inspiration for workers everywhere who had faced disrespect but chose to hold on to their self-respect. Memes, videos, and quotes from her calm response, "I expect to be treated with the same respect," went viral, cementing her words as a powerful reminder for millions of viewers. On the other hand, Richard Collins faced the full weight of public backlash. Overnight, he went from being a celebrated millionaire CEO to being branded as a symbol of arrogance and entitlement. Investors who had once been eager to work with him began pulling out of deals, fearing that associating with his name would damage their own reputations. Newspapers ran stories with titles like "Arrogance Cost CEO $200 million deal," and "How one insult destroyed Richard Collins' career in minutes." Within days, his company's stock price started to dip, his board members questioned his leadership, and sponsors quietly distanced themselves. The moral of the story spread like wildfire. Money can't buy respect. Arrogance destroys opportunities. And most importantly, the way you treat people who can do nothing for you reveals your true character. In the end, Richard walked out of that restaurant with nothing but shame and regret, while Amina walked away with her head held high. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't fought back with anger. And yet she had won something far greater than any contract. She had won the respect and admiration of millions of people around the world. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.